The District of Columbia, and commonly known as Washington or D.C., is the capital city and federal district of the United States. The city is on the Potomac River, across from Virginia, and shares land borders with Maryland to its north and east. It was named after George Washington, the first president of the United States. The district is named after Columbia, the female personification of the nation. The U.S. Constitution in 1789 called for the creation of a federal district under the exclusive jurisdiction of the U.S. Congress. As such, Washington, D.C., is not part of any state, and is not one itself. The Residence Act, adopted on July 16, 1790, approved the creation of the Capital District along the Potomac River. The city was founded in 1791, and the Sixth Congress held the first session in the unfinished Capitol building in 1800 after the capital moved from Philadelphia. In 1801, the District of Columbia, formerly part of Maryland and Virginia and including the existing settlements of Georgetown and Alexandria, was officially recognized as the federal district. Initially, the city was a separate settlement within the larger district. In 1846, Congress returned the land originally ceded by Virginia, including the city of Alexandria. In 1871, it created a single municipality for the remaining portion of the district. There have been several unsuccessful efforts to make the district into a state since the 1880s. A statehood bill passed the House of Representatives in 2021 but was not adopted by the U.S. Senate. To become law, it would have to be passed by the Senate and signed by President. It would have renamed the city Washington, Douglas Commonwealth, and shrunk the federal district to about the size of the National Mall. Designed in 1791 by Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the city is divided into quadrants, which are centered around the Capitol building and include 131 neighborhoods. As of the 2020 census, the city had a population of 689,545. Commuters from the city's Maryland and Virginia suburbs raise the city's daytime population to more than 1 million during the work week. The Washington metropolitan area, which includes parts of Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia, is the country's seventh largest metropolitan area, with a 2023 population of 6.3 million residents. A locally elected mayor and 13-member council have governed the district since 1973, though Congress retains the power to overturn local laws. Washington, D.C., residents are, on the federal level, politically disenfranchised since the city's residents do not have voting representation in Congress. The city's residents elect a single non-voting congressional delegate to the U.S. House of Representatives. The city's voters choose 3 presidential electors in accordance with the 23rd Amendment, passed in 1961. Washington, D.C. anchors the southern end of the Northeast megalopolis. As the seat of the U.S. federal government, the city is an important world political capital. The city hosts the buildings that house federal government headquarters, including the White House, the Capitol, the Supreme Court building, and multiple federal departments and agencies. The city is home to many national monuments and museums, located most prominently on or around the National Mall, including the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Washington Monument. It hosts 177 foreign embassies and serves as the headquarters for the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Organization of American States, and other international organizations. Home to many of the nation's largest industry associations, nonprofit organizations, and think tanks, D.C. is known as a lobbying hub, with K Street as the industry center. The city had 20.7 million domestic visitors and 1.2 million international visitors, ranking 7th among U.S. cities as of 2022. 9 cities served as capitals to the Continental Congress and under the Articles of Confederation. New York City was the first capital upon the adoption of the Constitution, succeeded by Philadelphia, which was capital from 1790 to 1800. On October 6, 1783, after the capital was forced by the Pennsylvania Mutiny of 1783 to move to Princeton, Congress resolved to consider a new location for it. The following day, Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts moved that buildings for the use of Congress be erected on the banks of the Delaware near Trenton, or of the Potomac, near Georgetown, provided a suitable district can be procured on one of the rivers as aforesaid, for a federal town. In Federalist No. 43, published January 23, 1788, James Madison argued that the new federal government would need authority over a national capital to provide for its own maintenance and safety. The Pennsylvania Mutiny of 1783 emphasized the need for the national government not to rely on any state for its own security. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution permits the establishment of a district, not exceeding 10 miles square, as may, by cession of particular states, and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States. However, the Constitution does not specify a location for the capital. In the Compromise of 1790, Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson agreed that the federal government would pay each state's remaining Revolutionary War debts in exchange for establishing the new national capital in the southern United States. On July 9, 1790, Congress passed the Residence Act, which approved the creation of a national capital on the Potomac River. Under the Residence Act, the exact location was to be selected by President George Washington, who signed the bill into law on July 16, 1790. Formed from land donated by Maryland and Virginia, the initial shape of the federal district was a square measuring 10 miles, 16 kilometers, on each side and totaling 100 square miles, 259 square kilometers. Two pre-existing settlements were included in the territory, the port of Georgetown, founded in 1751, and the port city of Alexandria, Virginia, founded in 1749. In 1791 and 1792, a team led by Andrew Ellicott, including Ellicott's brothers Joseph and Benjamin and African-American astronomer Benjamin Banneker, whose parents had been enslaved, surveyed the borders of the federal district and placed boundary stones at every mile point. Many of these stones are still standing. Both Maryland and Virginia were slave states, and slavery existed in the district from its founding. The building of Washington likely relied in significant part on slave labor, and slave receipts have been found for the White House, Capitol building, and establishment of Georgetown University. The city became an important slave market and a center of the nation's internal slave trade. After its survey, the new federal city was constructed on the north bank of the Potomac River, to the east of Georgetown, centered on Capitol Hill. On September 9, 1791, 3 commissioners overseeing the Capitol's construction named the city in honor of President Washington. The same day, the federal district was named Columbia, a feminine form of Columbus, which was a poetic name for the United States commonly used at that time. Congress held its first session there on November 17, 1800. Congress passed the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1801, which officially organized the district and placed the entire territory under the exclusive control of the federal government. The area within the district was organized into 2 counties, the County of Washington to the east and north of the Potomac and the County of Alexandria to the west and south. After the Act's passage, citizens in the district were no longer considered residents of Maryland or Virginia, which ended their representation in Congress. Washington, D.C., is located in the Mid-Atlantic region of the U.S. East Coast. The city has a total area of 68.34 square miles, 177 square kilometers, of which 61.05 square miles, 158.1 square kilometers, is land, and 7.29 square miles, 18.9 square kilometers, 10.67%, is water. The district is bordered by Montgomery County, Maryland, to the northwest, Prince George's County, Maryland, to the east, Arlington County, Virginia, to the west, and Alexandria, Virginia, to the south. The south bank of the Potomac River forms the district's border with Virginia and has 2 major tributaries, the Anacostia River and Rock Creek. Tiber Creek, a natural watercourse that once passed through the National Mall, was fully enclosed underground during the 1870s. The creek also formed a portion of the now-filled Washington City Canal, which allowed passage through the city to the Anacostia River from 1815 until the 1850s. The Chesapeake and Ohio Canal starts in Georgetown and was used during the 19th century to bypass the Little Falls of the Potomac River, located at the northwest edge of the city at the Atlantic seaboard fall line. The highest natural elevation in the district is 409 feet, 125 m, above sea level at Fort Reno Park in upper northwest Washington, D.C. The lowest point is sea level at the Potomac River. The geographic center of Washington is near the intersection of 4th and L Streets NW. The district has 7,464 acres, 30.21 square kilometers, of parkland, about 19% of the city's total area, the second highest among high-density U.S. cities after Philadelphia. The city's sizable parkland was a factor in the city being ranked as third in the nation for park access and quality in the 2018 Park Score ranking of the park systems of the nation's 100 most populous cities, according to Trust for Public Land, a nonprofit organization. The National Park Service manages most of the 9,122 acres, 36.92 square kilometers, of city land owned by the U.S. government. Rock Creek Park is a 1,754-acre, 7.10 square kilometers, urban forest in northwest Washington, which extends 9.3 miles, 15.0 kilometers, through a stream valley that bisects the city. Established in 1890, it is the country's fourth oldest national park and is home to a variety of plant and animal species, including raccoon, deer, owls, and coyotes. Other National Park Service properties include the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park, the National Mall and Memorial Parks, Theodore Roosevelt Island, Columbia Island, Fort DuPont Park, Meridian Hill Park, Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens, and Anacostia Park. The District of Columbia Department of Parks and Recreation maintains the city's 900 acres, 3.6 square kilometers, of athletic fields and playgrounds, 40 swimming pools, and 68 recreation centers. The U.S. Department of Agriculture operates the 446-acre, 1.80 square kilometers, United States National Arboretum in Northeast Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., was a planned city, and many of the city's street grids were developed in that initial plan. In 1791, President George Washington commissioned Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, a French-born military engineer and artist, to design the new capital. He enlisted the help of Isaac Roberteau, Etienne Sulpice Hallett and Scottish surveyor Alexander Ralston to help lay out the city plan. The L'Enfant plan featured broad streets and avenues radiating out from rectangles, providing room for open space and landscaping. L'Enfant was also provided a roll of maps by Thomas Jefferson depicting Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Strasbourg, Paris, Orleans, Bordeaux, Lyon, Marseille, Turin, and Milan. L'Enfant's design also envisioned a garden-lined Grand Avenue about 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, long and 400 feet, 120 m, wide in an area that is now the National Mall inspired by the grounds at Versailles and Tuileries Gardens. In March 1792, President Washington dismissed L'Enfant due to conflicts with the 3 commissioners appointed to supervise the capital's construction. Andrew Ellicott, who worked with L'Enfant in surveying the city, was then tasked with completing its design. Though Ellicott revised the original L'Enfant plans, including changing some street patterns, L'Enfant is still credited with the city's overall design. By the early 20th century, however, L'Enfant's vision of a grand national capital was marred by slums and randomly placed buildings in the city, including a railroad station on the National Mall. Congress formed a special committee charged with beautifying Washington's ceremonial core. What became known as the Macmillan Plan was finalized in 1901 and included re-landscaping the Capitol grounds and the National Mall, clearing slums, and establishing a new city-wide park system. The plan is thought to have largely preserved L'Enfant's intended design for the city. By law, the city's skyline is low and sprawling. The Federal Height of Buildings Act of 1910 prohibits buildings with height exceeding the width of the adjacent street plus 20 feet, 6.1 m. Despite popular belief, no law has ever limited buildings to the height of the United States Capitol or the 555-foot, 169 m, Washington Monument, which remains the district's tallest structure. City leaders have cited the height restriction as a primary reason that the district has limited affordable housing and its metro area has suburban sprawl and traffic problems. Washington, D.C., still has a relatively high homelessness rate, despite its high living standard compared to many American cities. Washington, D.C., is divided into 4 quadrants of unequal area: Northwest, NW, Northeast, NE, Southeast, SE, and Southwest, SW. The axes bounding the quadrants radiate from the U.S. Capitol. All road names include the quadrant abbreviation to indicate their location. House numbers generally correspond with the number of blocks away from the Capitol. Most streets are set out in a grid pattern with east, west streets named with letters, example C Street SW, north, south streets with numbers, example 4th Street NW, and diagonal avenues, many of which are named after states. The city of Washington was bordered on the north by Boundary Street, renamed Florida Avenue in 1890, Rock Creek to the west, and the Anacostia River to the east. Washington, D.C.'s street grid was extended, where possible, throughout the district starting in 1888. Georgetown streets were renamed in 1895. Some streets are particularly noteworthy, including Pennsylvania Avenue, which connects the White House to the Capitol, and K Street, which houses the offices of many lobbying groups. Constitution Avenue and Independence Avenue, located on the north and south sides of the National Mall, respectively, are home to many of Washington's iconic museums, including many Smithsonian Institution buildings and the National Archives building. Washington hosts 177 foreign embassies. These maintain nearly 300 buildings and more than 1,600 residential properties, many of which are on a section of Massachusetts Avenue informally known as Embassy Row. As of 2023, the Washington metropolitan area, including the District of Columbia as well as parts of Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia, was one of the nation's largest metropolitan economies. Its growing and diversified economy has an increasing percentage of professional and business service jobs in addition to more traditional jobs rooted in tourism, entertainment, and government. As the national capital, Washington, D.C. hosts about 185 foreign missions, including embassies, ambassadors' residences, and international cultural centers. Many are concentrated along a stretch of Massachusetts Avenue known informally as Embassy Row. D.C. is consequently one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world. It hosts a number of internationally themed festivals and events, often in collaboration with foreign missions or delegations. The city government maintains an Office of International Affairs to liaise with the diplomatic community and foreign delegations. Washington, D.C., is a leading center for national and international research organizations, especially think tanks engaged in public policy. As of 2020, 8% of the country's think tanks are headquartered in the city, including many of the largest and most widely cited. These include the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Center for Strategic and International Studies, Peterson Institute for International Economics, the Heritage Foundation, and Urban Institute. D.C. is home to many nonprofit organizations that engage with issues of domestic and global importance by conducting advanced research, running programs, or public advocacy. Among these organizations are the UN Foundation, Human Rights Campaign, Amnesty International, and the National Endowment for Democracy. Major medical research institutions include the MedStar Washington Hospital Center and the Children's National Medical Center. The city is the country's primary location for international development firms, many of which contract with the D.C.-based United States Agency for International Development, USAID, the U.S. federal government's aid agency. The American Red Cross, a humanitarian agency focused on emergency relief, is also headquartered in the city. According to statistics compiled in 2011, 4 of the largest 500 companies in the country were headquartered in Washington, D.C. In the 2023 Global Financial Centers Index, Washington was ranked as having the 8th most competitive financial center in the world, and 4th most competitive in the United States, after New York City, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Among the largest companies headquartered in Washington, D.C., are Fannie Mae, Amtrak, Danaher Corporation, FTI Consulting, and Hogan Lovells. Tourism is the city's second largest industry, after the federal government. The city and the wider Washington region have a diverse array of attractions for tourists, such as monuments, memorials, museums, sports events, and trails. Within the city, the National Mall serves as the center of the tourism industry. It is there that many of the city's museums and monuments are located. Adjacent to the mall sits the tidal basin, where several additional memorials and monuments lie, including the popular Jefferson Memorial. Washington Union Station is a popular tourist spot with its multitude of restaurants and shops. Washington, D.C., is a national center for the arts, home to several concert halls and theaters. The John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts is home to the National Symphony Orchestra, the Washington National Opera, and the Washington Ballet. The Kennedy Center honors are awarded each year to those in the performing arts who have contributed greatly to the cultural life of the United States. This ceremony is often attended by the sitting U.S. President and other dignitaries and celebrities. The Kennedy Center also awards the annual Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. Columbia Records, a major music record label in the U.S., was founded in Washington, D.C. in 1889. Washington, D.C., is rich in fine and casual dining. Some consider it among the country's best cities for dining. The city has a diverse range of restaurants, including a wide variety of international cuisines. Washington, D.C. is home to many of the country's most visited museums and some of the most visited museums in the world. In 2022, the National Museum of Natural History and the National Gallery of Art were the 2 most visited museums in the country. Overall, Washington had 8 of the 28 most visited museums in the U.S. in 2022. That year, the National Museum of Natural History was the 5th most visited museum in the world, the National Gallery of Art was the 11th. There are many parks, gardens, squares, and circles throughout Washington. The city has 683 parks and green spaces, comprising almost a quarter of its land area. According to the nonprofit Trust for Public Land, Washington ranked first among the 100 largest U.S. cities for its public parks, based on indicators such as accessibility, the share of land reserved for parks, and the amount invested in green spaces. Rock Creek Park, located in northwest D.C., is the largest park in the city and is administered by the National Park Service. Located on the northern side of the White House, Lafayette Square is a historic public square. Named after the Marquis de Lafayette, a Frenchman who served as a commander during the American Revolutionary War, the square has been the site of many protests, marches, and speeches. The houses bordering Lafayette Square have served as the home to many notable figures, such as First Lady Dolly Madison and Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State William H. Seward, who was stabbed by an intruder in his Lafayette Square house on the evening of President Lincoln's assassination. Located next to the square and on Pennsylvania Avenue across from the White House is the Blair House, which serves as the primary state guest house for the U.S. President. There are several river islands in Washington, D.C., including Theodore Roosevelt Island in the Potomac River, which hosts the Theodore Roosevelt National Memorial and a number of trails. Columbia Island, also in the Potomac, is home to the Lyndon Baines Johnson Memorial Grove, the Navy, Merchant Marine Memorial, and a marina. Kingman Island, in the Anacostia River, is home to Langston Golf Course and a public park with trails. Other parks, gardens, and squares include Dumbarton Oaks, Meridian Hill Park, The Yards, Anacostia Park, Lincoln Park, Kenilworth Park, and Aquatic Gardens, Franklin Square, McPherson Square, Farragut Square, and Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park. There are a large number of traffic circles and circle parks in Washington, D.C., including DuPont Circle, Logan Circle, Scott Circle, Sheridan Circle, Thomas Circle, Washington Circle, and others. The United States National Arboretum is a dense arboretum in northeast D.C. filled with gardens and trails. Its most notable landmark is the National Capitol Columns Monument. Washington, D.C. is one of 13 cities in the United States with teams from the primary 4 major professional men's sports and is home to 2 major professional women's teams. The Washington Nationals of Major League Baseball are the most popular sports team in the district, as of 2019. They play at Nationals Park, which opened in 2008. The Washington Commanders of the National Football League play at Northwest Stadium in nearby Landover, Maryland. The Washington Wizards of the National Basketball Association and the Washington Capitals of the National Hockey League play at Capital One Arena in the city's Penn Quarter neighborhood. The Washington Mystics of the Women's National Basketball Association play at Entertainment and Sports Arena. D.C. United of Major League Soccer and the Washington Spirit of the National Women's Soccer League play at Audi Field. The city's teams have won a combined 14 professional league championships over their respective histories. The Washington Commanders, named the Washington Redskins until 2020, have won 2 NFL championships and 3 Super Bowls. D.C. United has won 4 and the Washington Wizards, then named the Washington Bullets, Washington Capitals, Washington Mystics, Washington Nationals, and Washington Spirit have each won a single championship. Other professional and semi-professional teams in Washington, D.C. include D.C. Defenders of the XFL, Old Glory D.C. of Major League Rugby, the Washington Castles of World Team Tennis, and the D.C. Divas of the Independent Women's Football League. The William H.G. Fitzgerald Tennis Center in Rock Creek Park hosts the Washington Open, a joint men's ATP Tour 500 and women's WTA Tour 500 level tennis tournament, every summer in late July and early August. Washington, D.C. has 2 major annual marathon races, the Marine Corps Marathon, held every autumn, and the Rock 'n' Roll USA Marathon, held each spring. The Marine Corps Marathon began in 1976 and is sometimes called the People's Marathon because it is the largest marathon that does not offer prize money to participants. The district's 4 NCAA Division I teams are the American Eagles of American University, George Washington Revolutionaries of George Washington University, the Georgetown Hoyas of Georgetown University, and the Howard Bison and Lady Bison of Howard University. The Georgetown men's basketball team is the most notable and also plays at Capital One Arena. Washington, D.C. area's regional sports television network is Monumental Sports Network, and was known as NBC Sports Washington until September 2023. Thank you for watching this video.